The Asia Tech Podcast is brought to you by AWS, the world's most comprehensive and broadly adopted cloud platform. Use AWS now to lower your business's costs, become more agile, and for faster innovation. Apply to get $1,000 of free hosting credits at asiatechpodcast.com/AWS and get a chance to win an Echo Dot 3.
Hello?
Podcast Network Asia.
Hi, this is Michael Waits, and welcome back to the Asia Tech Podcast. Today, I'm joined by Arash Tayebi, the CEO and a co-founder at Kara Technologies. Arash, how are you doing today?
Fantastic. I'm doing good. How are you?
I am super. And thank you so much for agreeing to come back and do this. I really appreciate it. And even for the people that can't see, I would wish you could definitely see the room he's standing in. It's got this kind of cool looking soundproofing in it. We'll talk about that later, but thanks for doing this today.
Oh, you're most welcome.
Can you give our listeners a bit of your background for some context?
Sure. So my name is Arash. I born and raised in little town in north of Iran. So it's near the Caspian Sea. That's a place that you get the most caviars in the world. Yeah.
I didn't know that. Okay, go ahead.
Yeah. Fun fact. So I moved to I decided to study overseas, and I moved to Australia in 2010. I did my master in telecommunication at University of Melbourne. I loved that place. I decided to travel more. Then I end up in New Zealand doing the PhD in Auckland University. I moved in New Zealand 2013. I'm staying here since then.
Wow. And did you do your undergrad in Iran?
Yeah, so I did my underground in the city called Shiraz,
okay,
which are famous for the wine.
I love it. So you were born in a place that makes caviar and studied in a place that makes wine.
How cool is that?
It doesn't get much better than that, actually.
Yep.
So why don't you tell me a little bit about Kara Technologies? The answer is definitely not in the name. And I also want to understand what the inspiration was for starting it.
Sure. So Kara Technologies. So what basically do we that? We have this bold vision of providing the accessibility of the content and services in sign language, because as you might be aware, sign language is the main language of deaf community.
Right.
And we all think about the technology, and we all like in a blooming stage of information technology content produced every day. But I was wondering how we could make this content accessible for a specific community, in that case, deaf community. So how we can come across with a scalable solution which complement human interpreter, but at the same time is more smarter. So we can tackle like a bigger content. But bigger, I mean, how can we make next Disney movie accessible in sign language?
Right, and we'll get to that as well. But you don't seem normally when something like this happens, right? So somebody, somebody who's a paraplegic will create some, technology or something for people in a wheelchair, and a blind person will create Braille or something like this. But you and I are having a conversation, and you don't seem deaf to me. So I'm curious why you wanted to focus on this. In other words, what actually inspired you to do this, besides the fact that you think content should be accessible kind of across the board to all communities?
Yeah, sure. So first of all, I need to say I'm categorized as a hearing impaired.
Okay.
So my left ear is deaf, but the right ear is okay. So so I can hear you very well. Yeah, but the funny thing is we have two ears, so they're working like a sensors. Sorry, me being engineers. So this is how we distinguish when the voice source is coming from. So for me, I can hear you very well, but I have no clue where the voice is coming from. So it sounds like very funny, and so many embarrassing stories happen in my daily life. But I can communicate very well. So I'm privileged not because of a disease, because I didn't get the disease completely. So I have a problem, like inner problem called Meniere.
Okay.
Yeah, it's called Meniere disease. It's a French word, like a scientist in France find this disease and name himself after that. Yeah, like people name flowers after them, but he decided to name a disease after himself. So this is the inner ear problem. So because of that, I lost hearing in one ear. Okay. And for me, the more opening eye fact was because I am young relatively to this disease, there's a high chance of getting other ear affected as well. So I could possibly there's a huge potential me going completely deaf.
Got it.
Which is okay, but it was more, it was a very hard fact to swallow when I figured out, for example, in our university, like engineering #1 school in New Zealand doesn't have any deaf students. Or why in our high-tech startup ecosystem, we don't have so many deaf co-founders. Why is that? So that's made me more like interested about the deaf community and the challenges they have. Then I start talking to the deaf community and I figure out, wow, the root of the problem is much bigger than I thought. So that is how Carl created, actually.
So one of the things, and that's a really interesting story, and I was going to ask you if there was a higher likelihood that it would move from one ear to the other ear, but you've already answered that. And that actually it's a bit scary, I think. Well, at least for me it is. I mean, you're probably better at handling that than I am, but it seems a bit scary to me.
Yeah, actually, to be honest, I accelerate my deafness. What do I mean by that is, so this disease will affect your balancing. So it's more a balancing problem than a hearing problem.
Okay.
So when you get a mini disease, usually you become okay by yourself. So, but there are certain amount of people, and we don't know why, the disease just get intensify every day. So I'm talking about getting vertigo attack every day, and your life is super, super affected. And I was on the 33 tablets of the same beta-histine tablet a day, and still a day, and I still couldn't control that. I was like, I'm so sick of this. So how we can, because I'm getting deaf in one ear anyways, how we can accelerate whole process. And I figured out there's a method that injecting a toxic in your ear and kill the nerve. So when you kill the nerve, anything happen in your ear, your brain would not feel it. So we accelerate that. Then I figured out, well, I got this disease when I'm young, so there's a chance of getting other ear affected as well. So what do you do next? So
right. Yes.
This time I would not accelerate that.
Yikes. I want to talk about the actual technology behind Kara in a second, but I think a lot of people that are listening to this may think, because your eyes are fine, you could just read the subtitles or close captions and stuff like that. Why doesn't that work, or why is that not sufficient?
Is not sufficient because we have this perception of, hey, if you're born in US or as a deaf person, or if you're born in New Zealand, your English is your first language, which is not. Right. Because we learn a language when we are a kid by listening to a language, right?
Yep.
But a deaf person cannot listen. So English for them is going to be a second language. So the first language is sign language. So, and the other thing is our education system is not well prepared for deaf community or other minorities. So the literacy age of a deaf community in average is very lower than hearing impaired or hearing community. So reading fast subtitle sadly doesn't work for everyone.
That's interesting, right? Because of the literacy problem. And I don't think most people think about it. And I would also presume, and I think you mentioned this to me offline as well, but a 4-year-old can understand, but may not be able to read.
Oh, yeah. So I'm an engineer. So when I exposed to the problem, I go to panic mode and I have to provide the solution ASAP.
Right.
So this is like the old engineers, basically. So I went to the Deaf Education Center in New Zealand and says, what is your number one problem? What do you want? And they said, we want accessibility. Well, guys, there is a technology called closed caption technology. Right. And we can provide you an English caption of everything automatically. How cool am I, eh? Then they said, well, number one, kids cannot read. Number two, I was like, oh, that makes sense. And number two, even adult deaf people have a very low literacy age, which makes it very hard to read the software. And it resonates with me very well because English for me is a second language. So if I saw a French movie with English subtitles, it's very hard for me to follow. So same thing here.
Just so interesting to me. So what exactly does the Cara Technologies do, right? And I guess the other question would be, since you mentioned language, is sign language standardized between, like, is it standardized globally, or is it country specific and language specific, in the sense that, you know, since it's not spelling things, I don't think, is it standardized everywhere, or is it different in Iran than it would be, let's say, in Brazil?
It's different in each country. Like the sign language used in Australia is very different to sign language used in New Zealand. It's very different sign language that we use in the United States.
And why is that? Why is that?
If you look at the linguistic part, the languages would be similar to each other because those community or the people of this country has more collaboration.
Right.
And there was a trade happening. So, for example, Farsi is very similar to Arabic or Urdu because we Persians moved to India a lot for trade. So we learn our languages, so language become more closer.
Got it.
But for deaf community, it was very hard. And each country developed its own sign languages. So that's why it's very, very different.
So tell me now exactly what Cara is doing to solve this problem. And I noticed that there's an avatar as well. And I guess, what difference does it make whether there's a human signing or a machine? In other words, do the facial expressions matter as well? Like, does anybody care about that?
Oh, that's the number one thing. Yeah, in sign language, facial expression is so important. It's so important that it has own grammar. Imagine how important the facial expression is.
Wait, the facial expression has its own grammar?
Yeah. So when you want to, for example, ask a WH question, at the end of the question, your eyebrows should goes up. But when you ask yes, no question, your eyebrows should go down.
Really?
And that's a grammar of the language.
But based on what? Or is that a sign language thing, or is that a normal human emotion thing? In other words, if I was fully hearing, I wasn't deaf, and you and I were communicating, we could see each other, are you telling me that I just naturally, if I ask you a question, what is your name, that my eyebrows go up and I don't even know it?
Not as such as the hearing. So for us as a hearing community, when we been exposed to deaf community, we're so amazed by how much facial expression do they have in the everyday use. Right. For example, our guest staff, which is younger than me, he has more facial wrinkles because he used the facial expression more than me. So it's just fascinating to see this.
Wow.
Which is very cool. Like, I'll give you another cool story. So we use motion capture a lot. So one of the technology people came in, which they're like mocap, like high-tech, high-end people. They look at these deaf people signing, and we recording all their signs, and they look and say, wow, this actors that you got is so fantastic. The face is so expressive. How much you paying them? Where did you find them? I need that model. I'm like, well, these are everyday deaf people, and for that specific project, we're not paying them at the moment. And so it's because the facial expression is being used so much. The face of a deaf person is much more expressive than the hearing person. Then we had this challenge of how we can include that into the avatar, which we don't care about facial expression as such.
So does that mean, so you've built an avatar, right, that goes through, that also is expressive? So not only just using hands and arms to do what we would traditionally consider sign language, but the facial expressions matter so much that you have to build that into the avatar as well. How hard is it to build that technology? And then I guess the follow-on question is, how hard is it to customize both the traditional sign language and the facial expressions across different domains or geographies?
It is hard to make because before, like Nikki, we didn't care that much about facial expression.
Nikki's the avatar, yeah.
Nikki is the avatar's name. We work so much on our avatar, so she really exists. So she has a name, Nikki. So to get back to your question, the reason that it's hard, at least it was hard for us, is because all the industry like standard are focused on how to make an avatar which is like normal hearing person. Nikki is deaf.
Right. Has to
So
be.
she has to be like she has to. So, but one of the books that we have, there's a male voice on a book, but the Nikki who's signing is female. And why is that? Because she can't speak. So for us, sometimes to reinvent the wheel was a little bit a difficult part, and some part that has been ignored. I tell you another story. Before I start Kara, I saw there are other attempt has been done to use avatars in sign language.
Okay.
I was so excited. I put it on my tablet. I went to the deaf education centers in New Zealand, and I went to one of the community in Auckland, and we start showing the other people's avatars. How cool is that? This is your future, yeah! And we get a huge pushback.
Why?
I was like, why? Then one of the actually people from the Deaf Education Center in New Zealand give me a white paper, which is published by World Federation Deaf, saying avatars are not good.
But why though?
The reason is all the technology, all the things that we have, all the mindset and philosophy of making avatars are designed by hearing people.
Oh.
So we do not care the actual customer requirement. And as engineers, we hate talking to people. We like to put our big earphone and listen to music and do work because we believe that we are right.
Right.
But in that case, we're so wrong. So yeah, we learn how to create not for some group, how to create with some group so we have more meaningful effect.
But this is a really important point. In other words, the deaf community was not necessarily against avatars per se, but they were just against the avatars that they'd seen because they weren't created, like you said, with the community. They were created for the community. Do you know what I mean? It's like...
Yep. So at the moment, when I start thinking, I thought, oh, these guys are so against technology. But when I went and talked to them and I like really connect with them, figured out they have community using heavily technologies, like so many technologies that have been designed for hearing people. For example, like FaceTime, it's designed for us hearing people to talk to each other, but been heavily used more by deaf community than us. But the challenge is sometimes you can't develop something. It's like bringing democracy to the Middle East by attacking to the Middle East. It doesn't make sense.
Touche. Well said.
Yeah.
First, let me kill you, then let me install democracy. Kind of makes no sense.
Oil from me if you want to.
Oh yeah, and then steal my oil, and then please let me have democracy. Go ahead. You were saying.
I totally forgot what I was saying.
That's okay.
What was your question again?
No, that's okay. These are all important points. Now there is a solution to this problem that will not break the bank: AWS. The beauty about AWS is it's not just the world's leading cloud platform where the most successful tech companies use it. It is also super startup friendly. Yes, startup friendly. Why? Because it has the most functionality, so whatever you're trying to build in whatever architecture or language, it will work with you. AWS is also flexible in that you only pay for the services that you use. Your servers can also expand dynamically when you have a spike of users so that your app or service will not crash. We are hooking you up with $1,000, yeah, $1,000 worth of free hosting credits from AWS that you can use to build your tech right now. For a startup, this is invaluable. All you have to do is apply at asiatechpodcast.com/AWS and fill out the form to apply to get $1,000 of free credits now. We were talking about the avatar, right? I want to understand how this tech is going to get used. And before we get into that, you were mentioning stuff like FaceTime. And as with all of this stuff, I hadn't considered in the design ethos for something like FaceTime how it was made, or even Skype or Zoom or any of these technologies. how they were not made with deaf people in mind. Or frankly, even with blind people in mind. And let's talk about it explicitly, right? Think about it. You have your people don't know this, but you have your video on. I can see you. I have mine off, so you can't see me. But if you were 100% deaf, this wouldn't work. I would need to have my video on, right? So even all these free services that provide free voice calls, useless.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah,
and there's
absolutely.
no place for, the solving the problems for deaf people in here. Sure, the video works, right? But is it optimized for you to stand and do sign language? Like, it's not.
No.
Because it should be vertical,
so
maybe.
Not.
It's so not, right? Like, it's a square as opposed to portrait mode. I mean, I can go through just the things that I think, and I'm not deaf.
Yeah, I can list you many, many things that there's a problem. And these things could be addressed easily. But the challenge is, again, as a hearing people, as a non-blind person, as an outsider, how can you solve a problem for minority without including them? It's impossible.
Yeah, exactly.
So it's very easy. Just bring some couple of deaf people. They will tell you what's your problem, and you can easily fix it.
So you said earlier, yeah, it's just that easy. But you said earlier you want to create a technology that I want to understand how it gets used in video, and not just existing video, but in video production, right? In other words, can you make a non-deaf person using technology overlaying, and particularly in a movie, let's just say, right? Because in movies you have like actors are emoting, actresses are emoting, right? So they should have some facial expressions that matter, but they're not signing. Can you build technology that will allow them to sign even if they're not doing it themselves? You know what I mean? Overlaying the signing.
Yeah. So one of the project that I'm personally super excited, and we are on the NDA, so I can't tell you who and what exactly. But what I can say is, we had a huge debate on our team: is what is the true accessibility in the movie means?
Right.
We had all these options of using caption, using a signer on the background. Then we figured out why there's always an afterthought. Like, why is like, hey, this is done. This is it. How we can make it good for that people. Then we said, okay, how we can go absolutely crazy and make it like super, super inclusive for a specific group, like let's say for the deaf community.
Okay.
And now we are working on a technology which is not for movie yet, but for digital, like 3D movies, let's say Toy Story.
Okay.
We could get the character and overlay a sign language version of the same character in it. So in other words, we could make Mickey Mouse sign inside the movie, not in the corner, not as a like overlayer. It's something in it. Like I'm talking about signing inside. So that's something that made me really, 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 really excited.
So again,
does it make sense?
Yeah. Again, just to use the same analogy, let's go back to Toy Story, right, or Monsters Incorporated, or The Incredibles, right?
Yeah.
So these are animated characters. You can pretty much make them do whatever you want. And in the case that a non-deaf person is watching the movie, you could just leave it alone, right? In the same way that if it's in English and you're an English-speaking person, you can hear, it would be silly to put on the subtitles, is what I'm thinking, right? But if you're a deaf person, it would be neat just to be able to press a button and have the movie be sort of like sign enabled, and have all the characters themselves start signing their dialogue.
Yeah, so that's the whole plan.
And maybe even also change their facial expressions as well to make it more emotive. And that would be super
what happened neat. So that's a plan. So what we will do in a technical level, we delete the animation of body, chest, hand, and face, and we put the Kara version or a sign language version on top. So that person will have a new facial expression because, again, we as a hearing people are not as a facial expressive as a deaf community.
Right.
It's like we are far ahead, like beyond actually them. So what actually happened in that scenario is you delete the animation which already been done. You just add a new animation on top. And the other things I like to mention is sign language has its own grammar. So it's not like saying what is your name? In sign language, going to be what is your name? Sign language is going to be you name what.
Fair enough.
So the order also going to be changed. So we have to delete it and make it super exclusive, which I think we will have a cool demo in next 2 months, which is really I'm super excited about that. That's my passion of making true like inclusive movie.
So when you have that demo, you have to give me a link to it. Even if after we publish this podcast, I'll add that back in as soon as you can give that to me.
Sure. Okay? Yeah, you should definitely check it out. It's so cool.
I'm sure it's super cool. But the other thing I was thinking about, and part of it is because, one, I spoke to you last week, but two nights ago, I had some free time and I spent a few hours watching The Irishman, right?
Oh, yeah, I haven't watched it. I heard it's very long.
It's 3 hours and 29 minutes. But, the Martin Scorsese film, and, it was De Niro and Al Pacino and, what's his name? Joe Pesci. And these guys are all in their 70s and they look old. But in the movie, they used some very fancy and sort of newfangled technology and computers to young them down, basically.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And I think it's just a matter of time before companies like Kara can create the technology. In other words, they overlaid young age on them, right? They didn't do it with makeup necessarily, right? They overlaid some tech. And I can't imagine that you won't be working on, once you perfect this with animation, perfecting that same technology on humans, right? Because De Niro's never going to learn, and I don't know, maybe he already knows how to do this. He's a pretty progressive guy, but he's never going to learn sign language.
Yeah.
Right?
It's very hard for him to learn sign language. Maybe he knows already.
Yeah, but even Brad Pitt, none of these guys or gals are going to learn sign language just for a movie or for every movie. But your technology will catch up in a way once you get the animation down, don't you think? Like, wouldn't the next thing to work on would be to overlay it on humans using CGI or some kind of tech to do that?
Yeah, that is absolutely. So one of the areas that we are focusing on is on digital actors. So we want to make sure that how we can, inside the movie, make the character sign. And so what's happening now, and we could see in the future, even I'm talking about near future, is the boundaries between movies or actual character with the digital version is going to be completely removed. So and in the movie, it's going to be very hard for you to distinguish the real person is acting now, or it's an avatar version of it.
Right.
And the beauty of making it digital, you can do all cool sort of things with it. Imagine, like, even Robert De Niro in the movie speaking French with really French lip read and French acting, or like doing Italian with the Italian hand gesture. That's all about it, man.
Right, but it's the same thing for signing, right? because like you said, the hand gestures, but also the facial expressions, right? So adapting that. It's super powerful for the inclusiveness and for the accessibility. It also has a little bit of fear because you can kind of create anybody you want and make them say or do anything you want to do. So there's got to be some sort of ethical boundary between accessibility and nefariousness. But you and I are not talking about that. So interesting. So
yeah, I'm trying to control myself to not talk about it. So let's move on.
Let's move on. What's the status of Kara right now? Are you raising money? Like, what else do people need to know?
The people need to know that we are extending our service beyond New Zealand. So we are a Kiwi company. So we are started working on UK and US market.
Okay.
And we are very interested to explore the Asian market at the same time. So if anybody knows any connection who's interested, please feel free to just jump into our website and see how you can help us in terms of the connection. At the same time, we are raising. Our financial raise is affected by COVID, obviously.
Oh, right.
But I think now we are in the right time to come back again and raise.
So 2 questions before I let you go. One is, what kind of challenges do you face as a hearing impaired person that may be different from what other startup founders face? And in combination, both of the co-founders that I've met are both from Iran. Are there challenges that come with that as well?
Oh, many challenges.
Tell me.
Yeah, sure. So the challenge number 1 is We engineers or entrepreneurs are faster than the government and lawmakers. Currently, the law is not helping immigrant entrepreneur to travel as fast as enough in terms of in terms of the company. So the company that we're creating is faster. So when we expand it overseas with the Iranian passport, it's very hard to travel. And at the same time, it's very hard to, as an immigrant, to have a company. For example, in New Zealand, if you want to get an entrepreneurship visa, it's extremely difficult.
Why?
Basically, the entrepreneurship visa means that you should have your own money invested in your own company that they call you an entrepreneur. Yes, if you want to have a kebab shop, it's okay, but nobody puts his own money on a high-tech startup. It doesn't work. So basically, as an immigrant, we should not make any job. We should steal a job. So it's extremely difficult. And then just give you a New Zealand as an example, like the number of PhD students here who working in high tech and super passionate to have a company in high tech, like more than 90% are international.
Right.
So the problem is these international people cannot have their own companies. So it's extremely difficult to get in. So that's a huge challenge.
Yeah, it's this, and I'm glad you brought this up, right? Because it's this weird,
Sure.
I don't even know what to call it, but this weird situation, right? Because, I mean, I'm also an immigrant, right? I don't live in my home country.
Mm-hmm.
And the way the legal system is set up, it says, essentially, if you come into our country and want to start a company, well, then you need to have, let's just pick a number, $50,000 you have to prove to me you have in the bank.
Yeah.
And you're like, wait a second, I'm only 29 years old. Where am I going to get $50,000 from? That's why I'm starting a company, so I can make money and employ people. And instead of going to a bank, I want to raise capital so I could do this. Shouldn't it be easy for me to do that? Because I'm in your country and I'm going to hire your citizens to work at my company. So are you telling me as an entrepreneur that you only want rich people to be able to start companies? Because they're not nearly as incentivized nor as motivated as I would be. But you're making it hard for me to start. And then you want me to go back to my home country where I'm not there for a reason. And it's not just you in Iran. I don't live in the United States for a reason. I much prefer to live here. But you don't want me to be here, wherever here is, and then start a business that's going to put money back into your economy. And even if you do, you want to make it hard for me. So
it's extremely. Yeah, it's a topic that people, because it's a very dark side of entrepreneurship, to be honest. And not many people talking about it. The entrepreneurship ecosystem is not very inclusive itself.
No, not at all. It's all rich people, by the way.
Which is very sad. And I really invite all the lawmakers or immigrant officers or anything to just look at the history of modern entrepreneurship. Like, give me any cool example from Steve Jobs, Mark Zuckerberg, or any cool names. They never had like $500,000 of their money invested in their own company. It doesn't make sense. That's why the VCs are for. That's why the angel groups are for. So the whole ecosystem has been changed. But again, the lawmakers are so behind. They think as immigrants, they will come and make kebab shops.
Right.
But no, we are here to make cool companies. Let us do that. As simple as that.
I want to make a point to you as well. If you go back to Steve Jobs and Bill Gates and Mark Zuckerberg and the guy who founded Snapchat and Steve Ballmer and all of these guys, all of them had families with a ton of money. Okay? Why do you think Bill Gates could drop out of Harvard and his parents didn't care? Because he already had a ton of money. Same thing with Zuckerberg, very wealthy, not wealthy, but very rich family. There's no downside. But real entrepreneurs that are really trying to start from scratch, it's so hard, and the system is definitely stacked against, for sure.
I just give you, like, I have friends in New Zealand who have far more better ideas than me, but they only stop because the law here wouldn't let them to stay within the country and just follow their dreams.
Right.
So that's very dark, but hopefully things will change in the future.
Yeah, I mean, to be fair as well, and we'll end on this, I think, because we could just go down this rabbit hole, and I think we agree on this, but over time, the world just gets smaller and smaller, and it's not going to matter whether you're American, Iranian, a Kiwi, from Australia, from Thailand. You're just going to be able to travel more freely and settle where you want. That's going to happen, I think, in this coming generation because, you know, your freedom to travel and mine for sure is way better than my own parents. And I think that's just, and my daughters as well. So I think that's just going to keep getting better. And you're right. While the law moves slowly, it does move. And hopefully we can get it to move in our direction.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay. Absolutely. I'm personally very positive about the future.
Yeah, so am I. Otherwise we'd all be dead. Look, Arash, I really want to thank you for coming and doing this. I think you're an awesome personality and a great founder. And I want to see this succeed. So I really appreciate you coming and doing this. The CEO at Kara Technologies. This was really awesome.
Oh, thanks for having me, and it's a pleasure to be on your podcast.
This podcast is powered by Podcast Network Asia. For more info on the shows and the network, visit www.podcastnetwork.asia and Podmetrics, the only analytics you'll ever need for your podcast. Sign up now for free at podmetrics.co.
The views and opinions expressed by the podcast creators, hosts, and guests do not necessarily reflect the official policy and position of Podcast Network Asia. Any content provided by the people on the podcast are of their own opinion and are not intended to malign any religion, ethnic group, club, organization, company, individual, or anyone.